So now we're going to create the ability to add to cart from the product view itself. So if we look back into our products, go into the home page, click on any product, we see that we have this variation and then also add to cart. So what I'm going to do is jump back into that product detail HTML page, so product detail, and we scroll down here to where we actually add the form, which is we have our price as well as our add to cart. So we have the variation itself and then add to cart. Now the select box that we have, this option box here, this is actually what we need to set as an ID of item, or excuse me, not ID, but name of item. So name of item, and we're going to put this into a form. So form, and then down after add to cart. So if we go in here, what we're going to do is make this add to cart button being a submit button. So input type equals to submit, class equals to btn, and btn default. And then the add to cart is going to be URL cart. The form itself has a method of get, and the action is also to cart. Oh, the href doesn't actually be here. That's a mistake. You don't need that because it's a type of submit. Let's get rid of that href here. The action goes to the cart, and that's it. So if I refresh in here and say the value, oh, we should say value equals to add to cart, and get rid of all this. Close it off. There we go. So if I hit add to cart, it says question mark, and we need to, oops, not an option, but in select, add item, and it's going to go off of the value, which is the ID. So if we refresh, let's go back into this. Blue, add to cart, item is equal to 10, and notice it's saying cart item quantity failed. So like in our view, what I want to do back there is in this item quantity stuff, I'm going to go ahead and say, give it a default value of 1. So either it's going to be the quantity or it's 1. So if QTY is less than 1, then we'll say delete item equals to true. So we're going to say either way it's going to be delete item is equal to true. And what I'm going to do is also put this into a try block, because if there's some exception value, meaning it's not an item of 1, then we're going to just raise HTTP 404. So if they somehow put a different quantity in there, that we want to raise that HTTP 404, and I'm going to import this from Django.http. All right, so if we refresh in here, now it says item 10, and it just goes off of that default, which now has that variation of blue. So if we go to any of our products, iPhone, 16 gigs, there we go. That's working. So back into our product detail, we want to make sure that our single variation, meaning that there's not multiple variations, we want to set that one as well, which we had this add to cart stuff, but what I want to do is have an input at a blank input. So input type equals to hidden, and name is equal to item, value is equal to the object variation, this right here, but instead of price, it's going to be ID. So we'll set ID here. So this is the else clause that is related to this for loop. So let's make sure that we're doing it all correct. So I'm going to tab in the select, and then it's got variation count is only when the form's going to work, so we don't want that. We want it outside of that. So now that we have this if clause here, let's tab that in. And this is the else part of it, which is the if there's only one item in that variation, then we're going to be getting that. And since there's only one item, it's basically going off of price, but I'm going to set the variation ID stuff right here. And we want to make sure the value is in a Django template set. All right, so this input right here is taking place of this select input right here. So we can actually add that variation in there. And then finally, that closes off all of the variation stuff. So right here is all the variation stuff. The next part would be input type equals to number. And we'll give it a name of QTY. And we'll say default is equal to 1. Or sorry, not default, but value is equal to 1. So we refresh in here. And now we've got that value of 1. And notice you can go negative if we wanted, or we can just have 1. And then I'm going to add a class in here of form-control. And we're going to refresh in here. And now we've got our quantity in there, and as well as the item itself. So I'm going to add break. All right, so choosing the variance and then how many. And that's where we're going to leave that. So if I had 8 gigs, I'm going to add it to 4, hit add to cart. And we've got 8 gigs in here saying 4. So if I went back 8 gigs to -1, we still have 8 coming through here. So we're going to have to set something up with this delete item deal. So delete item should have been true if the quantity was less than that. We'll have to worry about that in just a moment. But let's just make sure our other things, if I add it to cart, it's actually working. This one was already in the cart. I'm going to go ahead and log out and then log in again to have an empty cart. So let's go back to our cart. Or no, let's actually select an item, headphones. We're going to add this to cart. And we've got our variation default, which is our headphones. And then phone cover, we're going to add that to cart. Another variation default. Perfect. So it's actually adding this to cart. If we go back and change this to 0 or -2, we're getting a little bit of an error. It's actually not showing us the quantity correctly. So let's go back in, and we want to make this if statement change to being if integer of QTY. So it's going to check whether or not if it's an integer of whatever that quantity comes through is less than 1, then we're going to delete that item. So let's try that again, and here, and there we go. Now it actually does delete it because that try block actually works. And the other nice thing about this is if we did and quantity equals to something else, it's going to say page not found. You could do all sorts of errors here, but that's essentially what I'm going to leave it as is page not found, because that's not technically how the quantities work. But having negative quantity allows us to actually remove stuff. So we can add our charging cable in. We can add all sorts of things in here, right? And add a few here. Add a cart, and there we got that new variation. Perfect. So now we've got our add to cart working well, and actually we can use this as a sharing link to automatically add things to the cart for other people. So this link right here, I could send it to a friend and it will update their cart to have the same item and the same quantities in there, which is pretty cool. It's very useful for us because then it changes it from being a form, like this is a form, but it's just doing a GET request. It's not doing a POST request. It's just updating it based off of the arguments in the URL itself, or the parameters in this URL, and then it reads them and changes them, which is pretty cool. So another thing to, I guess, look out for is if we did delete being true, that does actually delete whatever items coming in there. So that is something that might be an issue down the line, but for us, this works just fine. All right, so in the next one, what we want to do is actually have our cart view work a little bit better. So if you have any questions on what we did here, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.